You feel like you're all in. You use all the words and you sport the tidy little package called modern Christianity. You live in the world but are no longer part of the world. At least that's the party line. Yet, you cannot overlook the obvious. You're here, in the world. It's all around you. They're all around you. They live among you. That is an unavoidable fact. Among you, yes. But in you, that is the part that is completely optional. There's the rub. That is the choice. You're in the world, but is the world in you? The scriptures teach, nay, they warn, do not intermarry, do not consummate with those who live among you who are not of you. If you do, they will get in you and you will get in them. It will be as if your thin, fragile parchment became bonded with theirs, glued over every square inch to one another. Just try to separate them, to tear them one from the other, and all you will produce is fragments of both, still laminated together. It only gets worse when one tampers with their witness. What might that look like? Or it's like much more common than you notice on any regular basis. Included in this species are all those who would swear that they're following the Lord, but they're not. And you might not easily notice them because they work tirelessly to look good on the outside. Survival instincts prevail when animals are desperate to stay alive. This species will do anything necessary to appear like they're committed to the Lord, even though they happily consummate their relationship with the world daily. Are you using your animal survival instincts to substitute a sin that is harder to recognize for one that is obvious, just so you can remain undetected among those who care about sin? It's just like sowing tares among the wheat. It's all kosher on the packaging. It's faking bacon. If you're hiding, only one question remains. Are you simply struggling with sin or do you not care? God has no problem with dealing with your sin as long as you do. It's when you don't struggle with your sin, when your sin does not bother you, that God angers burns. If you're wrestling against entanglements with the affairs of the world, tempted to carry a label that makes you appear right with God like imitation crab, and there's good news. When you're weak, He is strong. But if you feel no regret or guilt about your sins and addictions, you may sadly discover that both pieces of parchment were cut from the same animal all along. Now for the reading of God's holy word. Therefore take careful heed to yourselves that you love the Lord your God, or else, if indeed you do go back and cling to the remnant of these nations, these that remain among you, and make marriages with them, and go into them, and they to you, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations from before you. But there shall be snares and traps to you, and scourges on your sides and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land which the Lord your God has given you. That is Joshua chapter 23, verses 11 to 13. He who is joined to a harlot is one body with her. For the two, he says, shall become one flesh. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 16. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? And what accord has Christ with Belial? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God, as God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. 2 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 14 to 17. Join me in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we're eager today to hear what you have to say. We've come this evening to pause our hurried pace of life. We come this evening ready to begin our weekly rest. And what a better way to begin and to stay throughout than with your holy presence and with your holy writ in our hands, finding its way into our hearts, filling the crevices that need to be filled, and providing the strength to carry on forward for the task that you bestowed upon each and every one of us. We are so thankful that you are way beyond that which we can ask, think, or imagine, that your ways are above our ways and your thoughts way above our thoughts. We want to thank you and praise you for that which you've done this week and that which you're going to do next week and then thereafter, for as long as we remain here on this side of heaven. We want to thank you for being able to do that which we a lot of times don't even have the capacity to think we need. And we know that you're making, your son Yeshua is making intercession for each and every one of us in the heavenly throne room as we don't utter the prayers that should be uttered. We thank you again and again. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. If this is your first time here, whether in our congregation or online, let me be the first one to welcome you. My name is Manny Fernandez. I get the opportunity to introduce Dr. Jeff and this ministry each and every week. The name of the ministry is kingdomembassyministries.org. That is the name of our website and also the name of our ministry, Kingdom Embassy Ministries. As I was over there, I was thinking about reading this little piece of paper that I have here, and I'm not going to read it in its entirety because I actually am going to keep the meat of it for next week. This is called an incarnation quiz. Why do I want to read this to you? Something like 14, 15 years ago, I was going through a bachelor program for what's called Biblical Studies with a Pastoral Emphasis. And this professor that I had there was a little, I would say the word antagonistic to common Orthodox Christianity, but he was kind of like under wraps. Like he didn't want everybody to know about it because he probably would have lost his position. But he would just kind of like sprinkle certain things out at you. And one of them, the ones that he did, was this thing called the Incarnation Quiz, which directly deals with Yeshua's coming to earth. And you know, the whole story behind the Christmas scene that we talk about, that we know about the manger and all these different things. And so every one of you guys here can probably be very sure in your heart that if I were to ask you 10 questions, that you would have answers to these questions. And I'll give you a couple of them just for a teaser for what I'm going to read to you next week, and then I'll give you the answers next week. So one of them, let's say, just would be, Joseph and Mary arrive at Bethlehem late at night. And you would start thinking, and you would start trying to go and look for verses in your mind. And the other one would be, the shepherds are amazed to find the baby in a manger. Very common one. So I'm not going to tell you any of the answers. I'm going to let you kind of just simmer on that. Next week, I'll be back with the rest of the questions, and I am going to give you the opportunity during our discussion time to provide the answers to those questions. And we'll see how much you actually really know about what the Bible says regarding the Christmas scene. And why do I tell you that? Simply because of the fact that this helped me to understand a lot of things that we have all believed for a long, long time that are not very accurate. And that will free you from a lot of what happens during this time of the year, where I know, you know, quite a few you still have hang up with traditions, and God knows it too, and He's okay with it, and eventually He'll help you understand a little bit more. But totally away from the topic today of what Dr. Jeff was going to talk about, I thought for sure he was going to hit on a very specific verse, a lot more than what I think he's going to hit on, but I will let him tell you more about that. So come on over here.
I don't think you don't read the notes before you get up here, do you? I don't think you don't read the notes. Hi. Do you guys know what verse he's talking about? Well, if you knew we were in Joshua 23 and 24, there's no doubt in your mind that if you have even rudimentary knowledge about the Bible, you're thinking somewhere in Joshua 24 where Joshua says, "As for me and my house, I will serve the Lord." Probably something like that. Probably the most famous verse in Joshua. When I went into the study this week, I asked God, please don't fixate me on what seems like the obvious verse to talk about when we get to Joshua 23 and 24. I don't want to just gravitate towards the thing that seems most obvious. For those that love to take notes, and you should be taking notes, the title of today's message is Interspecies Marriage. Interspecies Marriage. We'll know what that looks like or what that means. Three main sections, three main things we'll try to grasp today. Number one, the insidious practice of enculturation. What? We're going to define enculturation. Don't worry about it. We'll get there. The insidious effects of interspecies marriage. We're going to talk about species and what that means. The insidious consequences of adding fake gods to Yahweh. And why don't we just tell you what insidious means, right? You guys are thinking, what is insidious? Insidious is a treacherous proceedings that take place when covering my face. The treacherous proceedings that take place gradually and subtly, but with extremely harmful outcomes. That's what insidious means. We're going to start with this idea of enculturation. I want to say interspecies marriages don't work. You're thinking, what on earth is an interspecies marriage? I don't even know. Is that even a word? Maybe. I like to make up words. And the idea here is the fundamentals of staying separate. And it really has a lot to do with what Joshua is talking about. Right in the beginning of this passage in Joshua 23, we get another one of those things we see. We saw it last week in Joshua 22 in verse 5. We referred back to one spot in Deuteronomy 6:1, where there's this constant reminder when you're moving forward in an area of life or an assignment. God's like, therefore, be courageous. Keep and do all the commands that are written in the book of the law of Moses, lest you turn from the right or to the left. Right? That concept. This is in Joshua 23, 6 and 7. Then it goes on to say, lest you go among the nations, these that remain among you. You see, something happened when they took the promised land, because we're at the point where they possessed all of their land and took it and went into the land. But there are still pagans living among them. They didn't root out every single pagan. Lest you go among these nations, these that remain among you, you shall not make mention of their gods, nor cause anyone to swear by them. You shall not serve them, nor bow down to them. So there's this constant concern that if there's pagans among you, you might be interested in their gods. We're consistently reminded of this warning. Stay down the middle. Don't veer off path from the left or the right. Don't even mention the names of these fake gods. Don't inspire any interest in anyone around you to seek out information about these gods. That's what he's saying. And we'll learn coming up that the turning aside really has to do with intermarrying and consummating marriage with these people. Here's why this concept of interspecies marriage is important. It's because when you became a Christian, you became a different species than you were before you were a Christian. So interspecies marriage is when you join an unbeliever to a believer to become one. When that happens, you eventually become indistinguishable from your spouse. That's the concept you want to keep in mind. We'll talk more about that later. And then we get into the direct topic, the thing that really caught my attention. You heard it. Manny reads the hint is when Manny's reading those verses in the beginning, those are what caught my attention from the portion. And it says in chapter 23, verses 11 to 13, it says, therefore take careful heed to yourself that you love the Lord your God, or else if you go back, return, repeat, go back to that stuff you used to be involved in and cling to. This is an idea of marriage, unity, and consummation. To the remnant of those nations, these that remain among you, and make marriages with them, and go into them, and they to you. Those that are married, you know what that means? Going into them and then to you. This is the consummation of marriage. This is the warning. These pagans that are living among you, if you marry them and consummate a marriage with them, the Lord will never drive out those nations from among you. And they will become a snare and a trap and a scourge on your sides. A scourge is an instrument of punishment, a person or a thing that causes great trouble or suffering, and thorns in your eyes, and you will perish from the good land the Lord has given you. Now, I don't know about you, but this is serious stuff. This isn't just, God loves me, no worries, I can get away with that, and God's not really that serious. He knows I met that person, I love them, I'll evangelize them while we're dating, or I'll evangelize them while we're married. And this is like common stuff, right? In Hebrews 12, it says, let us lay aside every weight of sin that so easily ensnares us. See, that's the whole idea. And run with endurance the race set before us, right? Fixing your eyes on Yeshua, the author, Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, right? Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. So you are to, as a believer, run from every lustful temptation. Despise every sin that will ensnare you or trap you into something you shouldn't be involved in. If the pagans remain because you've chose to consummate, they will entangle and ensnare and entrap you. This instrument of punishment. You have to decide, this is the thing. These aren't just stories. Oh, that's just that Bible. I'll read that. I can get my child that Bible coloring book, or the Bible, the children's book, where you see the stories and the drawings, and we turn the Bible into this thing. This is serious warnings about mixing and binding with a culture that's not yours. By the way, that's what inculturation is. It's a slow and insidious mutation, a gradual acquisition of characteristics, norms of one culture by a person of another culture. It's the adaptation of Christianity to a non-Christian cultural background. That's enculturation. Now, we could just pause right there and say, welcome to the United States of America. There are certain things in life in which tolerance should not be tolerated. Adapting Christianity to common culture is one of those things. Now, you may not know, and we don't have time to do a detailed history lesson of Christianity, but in 313 CE, Common Era, the Emperor Constantine made Christianity the state religion of Rome. And he legalized Christianity and other religions, and then he blended those religions together along with the paganism of Rome and created a religion that most people think today is Christianity. The insidious mutation of one thing into another in the medical world is called cancer. What's the common result, the modern day result? Thousands of denominations, a mix of DNA, characteristic, and norms of common culture with pagan practices. And Manny had no idea what I was going to talk about when he did that introduction. In the introduction, you may have caught the imagery of two parchments. I picked parchments as the picture because a parchment is made from animal skin. I could have said paper. But two animal skins glued or laminated together, right? What happens when they're laminated together, when you try to pull them apart? Oh, I made a mistake. Once they're glued together, the problem is that all you'll get is a bunch of fragments of still laminated together pieces, right? This inculturation is a creepy, slow process. It says, I have to read this 2 Timothy, Paul to Timothy in 2 Timothy 3. Just listen to these words. But know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come, for men will be. These are the characteristics and DNA of a species to whom you should not intermarry or consummate. Lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Here's the real secret. Having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. And from such people turn away. For this sort, what sort? Everything I just described, summed up as a form of godliness. They will make you think they're godly. This sort creeps into household and makes captives of gullible women loaded down with sins. See, that's what happens. It's a creeping. It's this form of godliness that creeps in and wants to intermarry with God's people. The slow, insidious mutation of one culture into another. A blending where you lose the characteristics of both. Consummate. It's to make the marriage or relationship complete by sexual intercourse. Complete, a transaction. To make perfect. Right? As in, he who is joined to a harlot in one body with her. 1 Corinthians 6:16. And the verses we just saw in Joshua 23. Or make marriages and go in to them and them to you. That's the consummation concept. This is the warning that Joshua was saying, you know, God left these people here on purpose. Don't bind to those people. I love it says in 1 Corinthians 15:33 and 34, we'll get to this over and over again today. Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. Then it says, warning, awake to righteousness and do not sin, for some do not have the knowledge of God. I speak this to your shame. See, the knowledge of God. Don't bind to evil company. Don't do it. It will corrupt you. And there's that verse again in 1 Corinthians 6:16. Oh, do you not know that he who is joined to a harlot is one with her body? For the two, he says, shall become one flesh. You see, the rule, the universal rule, the law stands whether you like it or not, whether you're a Christian or not. It rains on the believer and unbeliever alike. You know, an airplane goes into the sky, and the laws that put that airplane in the sky exist if there's a pagan flying it, or a Christian flying it, or a computer flying it. The laws are the laws. If you bind with a harlot, consummate, the two become one flesh. Yeah. Evil always corrupts. You should write this down. Evil always corrupts that with which it has intercourse. That's why John says in 1 John 2:15, do not love the world or the things in the world. If we go back to Joshua, back to chapter 23 in the 15th and 16th verses, he gives this thing, you know, as faithful as God was to give you every promise that he promised, is as faithful as he will be is to reverse those promises if you do this. I'll read it to you. Therefore it shall come to pass that as all the good things have come upon you, which the Lord your God promised you, so the Lord will bring upon you all these harmful things until he has destroyed you from this good land. When you've transgressed the covenant, gone in and served other gods, the anger of the Lord will burn against you. I know we want a Christianity that just is God's blessings, 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 blessings. None of the responsibilities, none of the consequences, none of the curses. Don't marry or consummate with pagans. Joshua 23:12. That's up my version. Don't join to a harlot in one body with her. 1 Corinthians 6:16. Don't love the world or the things in the world. 1 John 2:15. We're going to hear these verses over and over again. The next subsection, I want to talk about imitations. Not that I'm going to spend my time talking about kosher versus non-kosher, but it's one of those things. It's one of those creepy little lies that creeps into the life of Christianity and perverts it. I call this section imitation crab and faking bacon. An imitation, it's a thing intended to simulate or copy something else. Like the tares copy the wheat, right? In that whole parable. I would like you to read it in the notes. Go read it. Matthew 13:24-30. The takeaway for us is how utterly difficult it is to separate the two for most of the time that they're together. And what you notice as they both grow together, the imitation and the real, it's really only in the end that something supernatural has to happen. God has to intervene for us to ultimately see the difference and separate them out, right? The safest bet is don't sow tares in your wheat field, right? That's the safe bet. That's the better choice. It has to be separated in the end. It's like the two pieces of parchment have to get torn apart anyway. Right? Don't marry and consummate with pagans. Don't join with a harlot, with one with her body. Don't love the world and the things in the world. Last week we saw this. I think it was last week. Pick a vowel. I think that was last week in Leviticus 18, 1-5. We won't spend a lot of time there. But the takeaway was this. You came from a pagan world, Egypt. Don't drag those cultural things, their gods and practices, into the new world you're going. The new world you're going in, that you're going to live in, the world you're living in, has its own gods and practices. Don't mix those with the things I'm telling you. Don't take them from Egypt. Don't adopt them from Canaan. Don't take them from your life of whatever you did before you were a Christian and bring them into your Christian life. Don't do that. Don't do it. Right? Why? Because you are not of the world anymore, just as Yeshua, Jesus, is not of the world. See, something happened. Something happened. You changed species, right? And here's the big warning. Here's the warning. Here's where it's like, I think it was Dale Carnegie who wrote the book, How to Make Friends and Influence People. Am I right when I say that? Yeah, I have no interest in that. Like, I don't really care if you're my friend when this is over. I really don't care. That's not my intention, right? So I'm not gonna rub some butter on it and make it so like you burned and it'll feel better. It may not feel better when you leave, but I'm going to give you the truth, right? Here's the warning. Doing pagan things and thinking it's okay because you claim doing them for Yahweh, for God, for Jesus, will not make the pagan practice acceptable. That's called inculturation. I'm going to read you some excerpts from Deuteronomy 12, 1-4. I want you to really hone in on the last verse when I read it. Ready? These are the statutes and judgments which you shall carefully observe in the land which the Lord your God of your fathers is giving you to possess, all the days that you live in the earth. When? All the days that you live in the earth. Okay. You shall utterly destroy all the places where these nations did what they did and served their gods. You shall destroy their altars and break down their sacred pillars and burn their wooden images. You shall cut down their carved images of their gods and destroy their names from all the places where they wrote them. You shall not worship the Lord your God with such things. Bible verse. Deuteronomy 12:4. All those pagan things, you name them, pillars and practices and holidays and names, you destroy them from your past and don't take them and say you can worship Yahweh with them. See, that's what the Bible says. That's called, if you do those things, that's called inculturation. I'm going to blend two cultures together. So the next time you say to yourself, God knows my heart, I'm doing it for Him. God's going to say, I don't care. Don't do it anyway. Now, you may not know. God has space for ignorance. But you're going to leave here today. One of two things is going to happen. Maybe one of three things. Don't break any windows in my house. Don't do that. But I'll say this. You'll either believe it and change, or not believe it because you're going to find a way around it, or you're going to believe it and not change. That's on you. I'll remind you again, acculturation is a gradual acquisition of characteristics of norms from one culture to another. In Christianity, it's the adapting of Christianity to a non-Christian culture. Now, you guys all know, even if you have a minor knowledge of the Bible, you all know about the golden calf incident, right, in Exodus 32. Absolutely insane moment of Aaron's career. I threw that gold in and a calf popped out, right? Like, okay, we know that didn't happen, but that was his claim. But you have to pick up the nuance. You got to pick up the nuance. They were not worshiping the cow. This is what it says in verse 4 and 5. This is Exodus 32. This is your God, O Israel, the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Tomorrow we will have a feast to Yahweh. Not to the cow. Not the cow brought you out. We're going to have a feast to Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. We're just going to use the cow. By the way, 3,000 people died that day. That's called enculturation. You shall not worship the Lord your God with such things. Deuteronomy 12:4. Don't marry and consummate with pagans. Don't join to a harlot and make your body one with hers. Don't love the world or the things in the world. See, that's the message, right? I'm going to give you an example of modern day enculturation. Take a breath, everyone. I'm not going to read the passage. I'm just going to explain the passage for time's sake. Some of you know this already. It comes from Jeremiah in the 10th chapter. I'll just highlight the 2nd through the 11th verse. Your reading assignment is go read that. I want you to walk through this pagan practice and tell me in your mind, can you recognize what Jeremiah is talking about? It's a way of the Gentiles. First of all, it's a way of the Gentiles. By the way, Gentiles is a nice, fluffy word in the Bible that means pagan. It's a pagan of the nations, right? This is a pagan practice. Ready? The custom, first of all, of this pagan practice is futile. What custom? Here's the custom. You cut a tree from the forest, you drag it into your house, you decorate it with silver and gold, and you hammer it with a nail so it's stable and doesn't fall over. Now, if you think, oh, by the way, the people who practice these things are altogether dull-hearted and foolish. By the way, this is the Bible. Don't be mad at me. It says this wooden idol is a worthless doctrine or custom and practice. The custom and the fake god it worships shall perish from the earth, so why bother? Of course, you all know what I'm describing. You all know what I'm describing, right? It happens to be December, 15th today? 16th? 1 billion people already have these devices standing in their homes. And they're going to claim they're going to worship Jesus on his birthday with it. No, they're not worshiping the tree. They didn't worship the cow. They didn't worship the cow. They worshiped Yahweh with the cow. Okay. Now, it's terrible. Where did it come from? How did it happen? A slow, insidious, gradual process when there was a mating, an interspecies marriage between God's people and the world. That's how it happened. It happened so long ago, you weren't there. You were born into it. It would be like if you were born into wearing a pentagram with a cross in the middle of it, and you thought that was a great way to redeem the pentagram. You're all thinking, I would never do that. Why not? 100 years from now, people will be doing it. I bet you never know you thought we'd live in a world where they couldn't tell the difference between a girl and a boy, right? A man and a woman, but we're living in it. Another reading assignment, Amos chapter 5, 18 to 23. Here's an excerpt from it. It says, "Woe to you who desire the day of the Lord." And then this brutal message, "I despise your feast days. I do not savor your sacred assemblies. Though you make offerings to me of such and such, I won't accept them. I won't regard them. Take away from me the noise of your stringed instruments. I will not hear the melody of your songs." Well, who is the people in the earth desiring the day of the Lord today? Christians. Christians. The message to those that are doing pagan things, Yahweh hates your pagan festivals. He doesn't like the assemblies you put together for those festivals. He doesn't like your worship music during those festivals. This is his word. You may say, oh, that's not talking about us. Yeah, that's how you turn a blind eye to what the Bible says. Oh, that's Amos. Who's Amos? You probably never even read Amos before. Amos, I thought that's a hillbilly name from something. Amos is a Bible verse? There's a book? Yes. He won't accept it. What will it be like for those who identify as God's children, yet marry and consummate with the world, chasing pagan practices? It will be, that's what Amos says, it will be darkness and not light. You shall not worship the Lord your God with such things. Don't consummate with pagans. Don't join to a harlot. Don't love the things of the world. Right? Now we have to spend some time understanding the species, the DNA of God's children versus the DNA of others. Right? The Bible says we are in the world, but not of the world. Right? Once born again, you are considered no longer of the world. Right? And John 15 and 19, it says, if you were in the world would love its own. The world loves those that carry pagan DNA. The pagan DNA species, the world loves that. Yet, because you are not of the world, you carry child of God DNA, because I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Okay? Here's a good indicator that you become a different species. The world hates you. Yeah, you see it, right? Yeah. So, by the way, don't consummate a relationship with the species that hates you. That's good advice. Any father would say that to his son or his daughter. If you do, you're going to get stuck together like two pieces of parchment that are laminated and glued together and can't be separated, right? I'm going to read for you, taking notes, John 17, 9 to 19. I'll insert some ideas so you understand species. Yeshua, at the end of the upper room discourse, he's saying, I pray for them. I do not pray for the world, but I pray for those you've given me. Those given to me to change their DNA, right? To make them a new species. Now I'm no longer in the world, but these are in the world, and I come to you, right? Because he's like, yeah, they're still here. They're not here, but they're here. Remember the introduction? You're not here, but you're still here. While I was with them in the world, I kept them in your name. You see, he's not of the world that we're part of, so he has to set us apart inside the world, and he has to keep us in the world, separate from the world. But now I come to you, and these things I speak in the world, that they may have joy, that their joy may be fulfilled. He teaches us about the separation, the two DNAs, and that you can have joy no matter what happens. Like even if you're living among all these people that hate you. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they are not of this world, just as I'm not of this world. They must understand that those with the pagan DNA will hate them because they're no longer of the same DNA species. You understand? And he says this, and here's the same concept we just saw in Joshua. These people are going to live among you. I do not pray that you should take them out of the world. See, you're out of the world, but you're not out of the world. You're no longer the same species, but you have to live here. So I want you to prove that you can live a life not intermarrying and consummating with the species that hates you. Right? You get it? Then he says this. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. This is how we get the DNA of Yeshua. This is how we become child of God's species. Basically, this is how we get impregnated with new DNA. The Word of God. The Word of God, which we know is Yeshua. As you sent me into the world, I'm sending them into the world. Now, with this new species, go into the world and make other species like yourself. That's the species. And in John 18, Yeshua is having an encounter with Pilate. And he tells Pilate, this is in verses 36 to 38, he's like, my kingdom is not of this world. He says, if this was my kingdom, I'd be the king. That's pretty harsh that he's saying this, right? And he says, I came into this pagan world to bear witness of the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And then Pilate asked the magic question, what is truth? Here's the truth. The truth is the word of God that sanctifies you and impregnates you with a new DNA. That's the truth. One species is part of the earthly kingdom DNA. The other species is part of the kingdom of heaven DNA. And then it says, Pilate has no problem with this. Yeah, you know who has no problem with this? Pagans have no problem with this. Yeah, that makes sense. It's Christians that have a problem with this. Because we are so desperate to stay connected to the world. We don't want to feel different. We don't want to be a different species. We want to, did you guys read the email, the headline in one of the emails, Dogs and Cats Living Together? I thought that was clever. You guys remember the movie? They're talking about dogs and cats. That's what two species can't mate, right? How do you spot certain species? How do you read DNA, right? Try this one on for 1 John 2, 15 to 17, right? Do not love the world or the things in the world, for all that is in the world. If you want to spot pagan DNA, it's the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. If you love those things, you are of those things. See, you could say, oh yeah, that's not my DNA. That's not my kind. That's not my kind. Those who pretend to have God DNA but don't are eventually exposed, and they always leave. They can only fake it so long, right? It says in 1 John 2, 18 and 19, it says, they went out from us, but they were not of us, for if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out that it might be manifest that none of them were ever of us. See, that's the faking that's going on. That's the part where people are pretending, right? Those with God's DNA stay out of the world, and those faking it always go back. And you, in the next few verses in 1 John 2, 20 to 21, you are anointed. You, if you're a true believer, are anointed to know the difference. But you have an anointing from the Holy One, and you know all things. I have not written to you because you do not know the truth, but because you know it. You are anointed to spot out those sporting God's DNA and those who aren't. See, the truth of God is the Word of God. It's Yeshua incarnate that impregnates you. So you have a new DNA. You become a new species. One species is the earthly kingdom DNA. The other species is God's kingdom DNA. And Revelation, at the end, when things have really heated up and they're coming to this boiling point in chapter 18, talking about Babylon. By the way, which species is that? Babylon? Yeah, pagan DNA. It says this. It says, get out. Come out of her, my people. Right? Lest you share in the consequences of what she's about to get. Come out of her. Get out of her bedroom. Get out of her closet. If you're married to her, find a divorce somewhere. Separate from it. Right? If you become unequally yoked, or have had communion with it, or been in agreement with it, we saw that. Do not be unequally yoked. 2 Corinthians 6, 14 to 16. Come out and be separate. How do you do that? The Word. The Word. Do not touch what's unclean. How many times can I say it? You shall not worship the Lord your God with such things. Are you going to leave here today turn this video off and say, I'm just going back to those things. Because my family, and my this, and my traditions, and I have memories, and there's pictures, and blah, 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 and nobody wants to be wrong, and all the different reasons why you just won't leave your pagan traditions behind. Don't marry or consummate with pagans. Don't join to a harlot. Don't love the world, pagan DNA, or the things in it. So you got the interspecies marriage, right? Is a marriage between two different species, right? I'm trying to marry a dog and a cat, or a pagan and a Christian, or my desires to the world's desires. We saw that. What does acceptable marriage look like? Well, first of all, in John 14:3, the process here, you all know, if you're a Christian, you've heard the phrase, I'm the bride of Christ, we're the bride of Christ. The technicality here is very simple. You're not really the bride of Christ yet. You're betrothed to be the bride of Christ. Betrothal is the husband has gone off to prepare a place, and then he's going to come back and get his bride and bring his bride where he was. Just like Yeshua said in John 14:3. I'm going to prepare a place for you. Where I am, there you will be also. Betrothal. The marriage supper takes place at the end of chapter 19, or in chapter 19 of Revelation. The marriage supper of the Lamb has come, and the bride has made herself ready. She's wearing white garments, purity. She can't be bound to anything else, right? What does the bridegroom species look like? Matthew chapter 17, we get a preview of the ultimate DNA of the bridegroom species. Talking about Christ, right? He transfigures on the top of the mountain in front of his three best friends, and they see him, and his face shines like the sun, and his clothes turn bright white. He transfigures. After the resurrection, when he's sporting this transfigured body, he doesn't look like the Jesus that went to the cross. He looks different. How do we know that? Because they come to the grave in John 20, and he's standing there, and they don't know who he is. It's not like, oh yeah, this was just a few days ago. That's Jesus. That's Yeshua. They don't know who he is. He looks different, right? The road to Emmaus is the best. It's in Luke 24. He's on the road talking to these guys, and then when he's finished, he opens their eyes, and then he vanishes from their sight. He literally just disappears. He disappears. And then they're telling the story when they come into the town, and it's like, we didn't even know it was him until he made himself known. And then immediately, Yeshua appears in the midst of these people. And he's like, peace be with you. And they were terrified, like they saw a ghost, like a spirit, right? They couldn't recognize him. He vanished. Glorified species can do that. They appear out of nowhere. Glorified species can do that, right? In John 20:19, they're in the room, and he passes through the door and just appears in the room. Glorified species can do that. And in 1 Corinthians 15 and 50 to 52, we hear about this new thing, something that happened. It's like, flesh and blood. If you were to cut yourself now, cut your flesh, you bleed. It says this can't inherit the kingdom. This can't inherit the kingdom. We have to be changed. There's the hint. Human bodies can't inherit the kingdom. The glorified body inherits the kingdom. That's not a body with flesh and blood. That's a body with light in it. That's a light body. That's a body that doesn't work in the same rules that we work here. That body disappears, it vanishes, it appears, it walks through walls, right? Here's the deal. If we go step by step through it, you got to get this. You got to get this. It's got to be practical, not just, it's all going to work out when I die, and then I'll be resurrected when Jesus comes back, it'll all work out. No, 2 Corinthians 6, 14, 18. Let's walk through it step by step. Do not be unequally yoked. No fellowship between righteousness and unrighteousness and lawlessness. No communion between light and darkness. No accord between Christ and the devil. No union between the believer and the unbeliever. You see this? No agreement between the temple of God and idols. By the way, you're the temple of God. Therefore, come out from among them. Come out from the pagan world. Be separate. Do not engage in interspecies marriage. Don't touch what's unclean. Don't consummate the union with the different species. Don't do it. Right? Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take a member of Christ and make it a member with a harlot? Right? 1 Corinthians 6, 15 to 18. See, you're the betrothed bride of Christ. Don't you dare unite with a harlot. Okay. We're really getting there. We're getting there. You got to strap yourself in for the next moment now. You're thinking to yourself, I'm in big trouble. I'm in trouble. I'm going to leave here right now. I'm going to drive right back to my house and in my apartment and in my house. There's a shining, glowing Christmas tree. Yep. Everywhere I go, I'm in trouble. I'm in deep, deep doo-doo. What's going to happen? I've unified with a harlot. I've done it. That's one little thing. Forget about the holiday season. Christians are doing it every day. Walk into the average church anywhere, you're thinking, I don't know. I can't tell the difference between a Christian and a non-Christian. I don't even know what they're doing in the worship. The girls are half naked on the stage. They're wearing tight clothes. They got cleavage down to here. They're playing secular music. They're throwing some Christ Jesus words in it. That's what the church looks like. All over the place. Everywhere you look. It's seeker friendly. Yeah, that means you can invite all the pagans in because they don't have to change. You'll never, ever, ever see the first 6 verses of Romans chapter 7 again the same way. Because the remedy to this entire thing is sitting there. That glued parchment, it's so laminated. It's like you can't tell where one fiber begins and one ends. You think if I start to tear this apart, it's gonna be a mess, right? But there's a way. There's a way to separate that. Make a clean separation. There's only one way to do it. You want to write this down? It's one way. Death. I don't mean death in the grave. In Romans chapter 7, starting in the beginning of it, Paul says, now I write to those who know the law. A woman is bound to her husband by law as long as he lives. But if the husband dies, she's released from the law of her husband. See, we want to make this all about the whole law. Oh, Jesus came and he got rid of the whole law. This is specifically the law of marriage. He's specifically talking about the singular thing that's saving us from being bound to the wrong parchment forever. You can unbind the parchment if there's a death of a spouse. You are already married to the harlot. You came into this existence. You were bound to sin, bound to the devil, bound to the harlot. You're stuck. The only way out is a death. Luckily for us, 2 deaths took place. Christ died and you died with him. It's Romans chapter 6. Explain the whole thing. Thank God those that know the law can apply the law of marriage. If you try to marry another while you're still bound to another parchment, you're an adulterer. It won't work. You have to have a death first so you're free from that marriage, free from the law of that marriage, so you can marry another. Thank God when you do that, you can be freed to marry Christ. Why don't you pick Christ as your new bridegroom? Why on earth would you go back and want to bind up to another harlot? He left us in the... I'm not taking them out. I'm leaving them here. Just like he did with Israel and Joshua. I'm leaving them here. Don't hook up with them. That's what he's saying. So I don't think it says it like that exactly. It It says something else, but don't do it. The word picture, right? Because you got to see yourself. You got to tell, I'm the temple. We're the temple of the Holy Spirit. You don't belong to yourself. You want to know this thing? Do you want to get another revelation? Maybe, I've said this before, maybe you've never heard it before. You want to know the deepest thing? We could look. Oh, not even a righteous man would die for another, Christ. Do you know how many men and women on earth have surrendered their life for someone else? Millions. Millions. You know how many men and women have been tortured to death for someone else? Millions. That's not the most special thing Jesus did. The special thing he did is that he stood in that garden on the night he was betrayed, and he said, I don't want to do this, but I will. And in that moment, he made a decision. He made a decision. I'm going to do my Father's will, and I'm going to be stuck in the only form that's left for me, in that glorified light body. I'm going to be stuck with that for an eternity. I'm never going back to where I came. That's the great sacrifice. See, in the law of the Hebrew servant, in Exodus 21, 1-6, it says, this is what happens when a bondservant comes in and they've served their time, and the 7th year they can go free. They can go free. They owe nothing. They can go free. But here's the thing. If he came in with a wife, he can keep his wife. If he came in alone and the master gave him his wife, you can go free, but you can't take your wife with you. You can't take your children with you. But if the servant loves his father, loves his master, and he says, I don't want to go free because I don't want to leave my bride. I want to stay with my bride. Then he has to get pierced and make a forever commitment to always stay as a bondservant to the master. Yeah, that's the law of the Hebrew servant. You got to make a one-time only decision. You can go free, but you can't keep your bride. Or you could stay, and you could have the marriage supper of the Lamb with your bride, who will become the same species. See, because you're not allowed to marry interspecies. You have to be the same species. You see, that's the great sacrifice. That's the great sacrifice. That's what he did for us. Because he's stuck in a form that wasn't his original form. Just for us. He did all that, and you want to go and bind to a harlot? It's so tempting out there that you need to go and become part of the world, chase the things of the world, have sex with them, bind to them. All that as we come towards the end. We finally arrive in Joshua 24, right? Where you would think we could spend our whole time talking about this. And it's important because there's these moments, I call this section witness tampering. Witness tampering. It's the part where you have to make these critical decisions, critical moments, right? Of course, in Joshua 24, starting in verse 14, he's like, listen, you got to fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and truth. Of course, we know God's word's truth. It's the thing that separates you. It's the thing that inserts that new DNA, right? It's the impregnating the DNA of God in you. Put away your foreign gods. Here's the thing. It's always about this thing. It's always. Say always in your mind. Always. It's always about chasing some other God. Okay, maybe we don't make little statues. Maybe you do. I know the Christmas tree. You're not going, oh, worship the God of the Christmas tree. I know you're not doing that. No Christians are doing that. We don't even know we're attached to these other gods. It's the money, it's the bank account, it's the vacation, it's the look, it's the looking down at others, it's the bitterness that's your God, it's the unforgiveness, it's all of it. You're so stuck with it, you want to bind to it, you don't want to let it go, right? It's those things. So he gives him an ultimatum. He goes, listen, in Joshua 24:15, he's like, you got to decide who are you going to serve. You're going to serve evil or good. Choose, here it is. This is the ultimate decision. Choose who you will serve. Other gods or Yahweh. Not Yahweh, other gods, or other gods and Yahweh. Right? You get it? Like there's not three choices. It's other gods or Yahweh. And then he says, listen, as for me and my house, there's the famous verse, we will serve Yahweh. That's what he says, right? And the people like in verses 16 to 18, they're like, yeah, the people choose. They're like, we won't forsake the Lord to serve other gods. Yahweh's the one who brought us out of Egypt. Yahweh drove our enemies out of this land. We're going to serve Yahweh. And he says, listen, I got to tell you something about Yahweh. You would think they know this, right? You would think you would know this. 19 and 20. Yahweh is holy and jealous. We're going to serve Yahweh. You can't serve Yahweh and other gods at the same time. He's holy and jealous. By the way, this is what happens when you reach a certain point. If you keep doing that, or choose to do that, you get to the point that he won't forgive you for doing that. I want you to just settle in that for a moment. Is it possible to not be forgiven? You know, that's called in the New Testament the sin that leads to death. Right? It says in Deuteronomy 29, if you say, I'm going after the Lord, I swear I'm worshiping the Lord, it's all about the Lord, it's all about the Lord, it's all about the Lord, and you go serve other gods, he'll never forgive you for doing that. I don't know. I find Bible verses that have any kind of inclination that says God will never forgive you, and you want to lock those in your memory and say, I am not going near those, right? John, in 1 John 5 says, there's a sin leading to death. I don't even think you should pray about that. Don't pray about it. All unrighteousness is sin, but there's a sin that leads to death. Now let me just say, we don't have a time, like we've done, this ministry has done lots of teachings on the sin that leads to death. You go into our search engine on our site, you can find 2, 3, 4 teachings detailing this. We're going to cover a little bit of it. I don't have time to do it all today. I just want to tell you, there's not a rock too big that God can't move it, and somehow you committed this egregious sin and God can't forgive you. Let's just straighten this out right now. The sin part is not the problem. Lock this in. It's the repentance part that's the problem. See, there's never a sin too big that God can't forgive, but there are people that won't repent. The sin God can't forgive is the sin you won't repent from. That's the one, right? But, Joshua in his graciousness, he goes through this. It's like, if you get an email, you have to opt in. Here's the 3-step opt-in process that we see starting in verse 21. He says, he's like, all right. They're like, no, we're going to serve the Lord. And Joshua says, your witness is against yourself that you've chosen the Lord. In verse 22a, 22b, they're like, yep, we're witnesses. We're in. Joshua says in step 2, you got to put away your foreign gods. They're like, yep, we're going to put away our foreign gods. In step 3, we're going to serve the Lord. And then he seals a covenant with the people in verse 25. And 26, he writes the words of this covenant and affirmation in a book. He takes a large stone, he puts it by the tree near the sanctuary, and he says, this stone is a witness to what you just did. Listen to this. It heard everything you said. What? Yeah, you got to see those little things. It heard everything you said. Now, if that doesn't make you think of Jesus, the rock, I don't know what does, right? For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them. That rock was Christ, right? 1 Corinthians 10, 1-4, you could see that. So this is no doubt, this witness, this affirmation is Christ. I'm going to serve the Lord, and I can't turn back. It's like a bridge too far, right? In 2 Peter 2 and 20 to 22, it says, after you escape the pollutions of the world through lust, and you go back again, you go back to it, you bind again to it. See, here's the thing. It's not the weakness of sinning again. Can you hear me say, it's not that you walk out of here and you never make a mistake. That's not the message. It's consummating. It's binding. with the harlot. You choose to go back to those foreign gods and that interspecies marriage and consummate it again. Right? Don't worship the Lord your God with such things. Don't bind with a harlot. Don't consummate with pagans. Don't love the things of the world. Right? You know, it was amazing. And again, there's a deep teaching of this on our website, but I just got to say, because you could see it happen. You know, remember when Pharaoh and Moses had their interaction when God says, go free my people? And the first interaction they have is pre-plague. In Exodus 5, Moses comes to Pharaoh and is like, you know, you got to let my people go. Yahweh says, let my people go. And he gives a really good answer. Who's that? Who's that? I don't know who Yahweh is. That's a safe place to be. Like, you just don't know. Like, you don't know. Now, of course, if you stay that way, it won't be good. But let's just say in that moment, he doesn't know, right? So, by Exodus 8 and the second plague, Pharaoh starts having acknowledgement. He's like, yeah, you know, go pray for me, right? And then in verse 19, his magicians, his little spiritual sidekicks are like, we think this is God. He's getting advice. This is in the third plague with the lice. He's like, yeah, I think this is the real God. So, and he says he is, but he's not my God. So that's in verse chapter 8, Exodus 8, 25 to 28. He's like, yeah, he's God, but not my God, right? And then in chapter 9, as we turn towards the home stretch, he's like, this time I've sinned, the Lord is righteous, and my people and I are wicked, and treat the Lord, right? This is after the 7th plague of hail. He makes this critical acknowledgement. I'm a sinner, and Yahweh is God, and righteous. And then right in the 8th plague, he gets some warnings. How long will you refuse to humble yourself? In chapter 10, verse 3, Pharaoh receives his final warning. Don't you see what's going on here? And his final shot at repentance, and his response is, if I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you. And by the way, the next plague is the plague of darkness, right? A darkened heart, right? He goes from, I don't know who God is, to Yahweh is truly God. Please pray for me, forgive me. No, I'm not going to follow him. I'll kill you. That's the progression into a darkened heart, right? The point of no return. You can see all the way through Exodus 10, from 10:21 through 14:31. You could see where that ends in the total destruction of Egypt, right? As we close, I want to bring you back to the New Testament in Romans chapter 1, where Paul catalogs this descent into darkness. It'll make perfect sense now with everything we talked about, right? It's like he's saying you've met all the legal requirements to commit a sin that leads to death, right? Meaning you no longer have an excuse. They knew God, they entertained futile thoughts, their foolish hearts became darkened, they were given over to their lusts and passions. Why? Because they knew God but did not retain him as God. You see, they crossed over this moment like Pharaoh where they said, I know he's God, I'm still not going to follow him. He gives them over to a debased mind. They become dreadful. They practice all sorts of stuff because they hate God. In the end, the righteous judgment of God against all those who practice such things is death, just like Pharaoh and his entire army. You shouldn't worship the Lord your God with such things. Don't consummate with pagans. Don't bind with a harlot. Don't love the world. See, that's the takeaway. In the end, if you've declared yourself a Christian, you have the ultimate remedy. You are bound. You're too pieces of parchment glued at every fiber together. And the only thing that could separate those was a death. If you're a Christian, you've participated in that death. My admonition to you today is don't go back and bind to that stuff anymore. Amen? So what we covered today, the insidious practice of inculturation. You guys know what inculturation is now? The insidious effects of interspecies marriage. You guys know what interspecies marriage is now? And the insidious consequences of adding fake gods to Yahweh. And of course your understanding of insidious, right? This treacherous proceeding that takes place gradually but has this ultimately extremely harmful outcome. Amen. Father, we just thank you so much for your word. And I know it's a hard word, but do with it what's necessary to change your people in the mighty name of Yeshua. We'll see you guys next week.